Doron Keidar from Israel. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor.
You've been introduced to me by Erik Selle at Conservative, the party in Norway. I know you have known each other for some time. You are now here in Oslo, but you have been spending significant time in Gaza as a soldier. Could you say a few words about yourself before we get into the stuff that's going on there?
Sure. So I guess a little bit of background to my connection to Norway. I have come here many times throughout the years to give speeches, to talk about Israel, to try to explain to the Norwegian people about what Israel really is behind what you read on the news. The news in the world is extremely biased. And what I think a lot of people don't recognize is that Israel per capita has more journalists in Israel, not just per capita, they have more journalists in Israel, period, than covering the conflict in Israel than any country in the world, any other conflict in the world. So that right there, right, it kind of raises some questions like why this obsession with Israel? Because we're not in constant conflict, yeah? There are terrorist attacks here and there, what have you. For the most part, Israel has a very peaceful, quiet country. A lot of tourists that come there are shocked at how peaceful Israel is. And a lot of them walk away, and these are people coming from safe countries like your country here, United States, and so on. And they say, I felt safer in Israel than I felt back home. Is their testimony that I've heard repeated multiple times.
Is that also the case after 7th of October last year?
No.
That this feeling of security is sort of prevalent?
No, because unfortunately right now, this is actually the first time I can say as also a security expert. I do executive protection. I work for an Israeli private company founded by the Naval Commando operatives who have served in the Naval Commando unit and other special forces Tier 1 unit of the IDF. And so these are some of the best guys in the country that provide security for diplomats, for celebrities, and all kinds of CEOs, etc. So my job is actually to do analysis for your safety when you're traveling in our country. And I'm usually a team leader in a lot of these security projects. So for the first time, I can actually honestly say that it is not as safe as it used to be because we have a multi-front attack against Israel. Most of the world is focused on the Gaza conflict, but what they don't recognize and are not aware of apparently is that we have been constantly bombarded from rockets from Hezbollah in the north and terrorist Hamas sympathizers and Hamas operatives also in what is known as the West Bank or Judea Samaria, in the heart of Israel. So Judea Samaria in the heart of Israel, in the central Israel, in the north, and along the coast with Gaza. So it's a multi-front war. And you also have threats from Syria on top of that. So it's north on Lebanon, but also north with Syria that is also developing. So all that to say that right now we're probably in one of the most uneasy times that we've been in for as long as I can remember.
But I mean, these other fronts or this other conflict or these threats to Israel they have been present for decades, right? With Syria, I mean, there has been, after the occupation, as they call it, of the Golan Heights, it's not exactly been a friendly relationship, and there have been this, occasional attacks from Israel into Syria. I mean, the West Bank has been, troublesome for a long time. The situation with Hezbollah has also been for decades since the 1980s. And now, additionally, you have the Houthis in Yemen that also sort of sends drones and rockets.
And Iran.
And Iran. But I mean, to some extent, I mean, it seems from my perspective, I mean, you've been at war since the inception of Israel in 1948, right?
Correct.
But what you're also saying is that things have shifted after 7th October in the sense that it's heated up. All the fronts are sort of coming at the same time.
Yeah.
But what has that done to the mentality of the Israelis over the last year? And can you say also, perhaps leading into that, how did you experience your personal experience on the 7th of October last year? How did you hear about it? What was your reaction? How did people around you react, etc.?
So right now I would say that the effect of this constant bombardment and every day discovering that someone else is going to either send an attack drone, and when I say attack drone, we're not talking about the little ones, little DJI that you fly around and have fun with. We're talking about these big, massive, the size of an airplane drones, a small airplane. So you have attack drones that target civilian populations within Israel. You have ballistic missiles being fired at us by the hundreds. I think it was like over 300 fired at us from Iran a few months ago. And I remember I happened to be actually at home on leave from my military duties, and I saw the rockets over my head. And I quickly was also documenting for people to let people know, like, this is our reality right now. This looks like Star Wars, okay? Like, I saw just over where I was standing, hundreds of rockets being fired at us, and then hundreds of counter Israeli air defense systems that were taking those out. And so it was very kind of apocalyptic, to say the least, and feeling like, wow, okay, this is really surreal. This is not this is not normal. I grew up in conflict. I grew up under constant bombardment from rocket fire from Lebanon.
When are you born? How old are you?
I'm 43. So I was actually born in Eilat, and then I grew up in northern Israel in a small town called Kiryat Shmona, and it's the very northern city before you reach the smaller community called Metula, and then you have Lebanon, basically.
Okay.
So Lebanon was my neighbors. I mean, you could see the border from my home, very close to where we lived, and we became the targets for constant mortar fires, Katyushas, and so on. And so during, for example, the Gulf War in the 90s, I lived through that as a young boy, and I had good friends who lost their father, who happened to take a smoke break, and then an air attack happened, and he was gone in an instant. Young boy, my age, he heard the boom. He was sleeping on his porch, and he got up, and from the shock of the explosion, and unfortunately, a piece of shrapnel decapitated him. So, to me, that was my normal. Most Israelis, fortunately, don't have that reality, but unfortunately, I did, so to speak. I mean, on the one hand, it's unfortunate. On the other hand, it's also what made me, I guess, resilient and able to cope with extreme traumatic situations, and to be able to do what I do today, which is defense, security, and to go into literally the heart of the worst hell on earth, and to be willing to do that, and to carry out our duties to defend the Jewish state from these how do you call them? From these demons, because I won't call them animals, because an animal is actually has better values than what these people do. Animals don't kill their own. And unfortunately, these people, what they're doing to other humans, and the type and way that they carry out their terror is not, it's not human, it's not animalistic, it's demonic. And that's what we encountered. That's what we had to face. That's what we had to confront, to be able to restore security and safety for our citizens. So the first day of the attack was October 7th. I was in my home. asleep after a long night of having a holiday meal. It was the end of Sukkot, the last day, Shmini Atzeret, and it's actually a very high holy day in Jewish calendar. And so, I was at a dead sleep, and my wife was the one that woke me up because the explosions didn't wake me. And she's like, something's wrong. And I was like, what? And, you're trying to figure out and, get your bearings. And so I picked up my phone and looked at the unit text message that we have. And I saw just a stream of hundreds of texts. And I go, okay, yeah, something really is wrong. And then I started to scroll through. I saw report after report after report, footage, everything of what these guys were doing. And then I saw that we were being called up. And so I hurried my family to our bomb shelter because we were under attack. We live in the Jerusalem Hills. So the whole country actually came under rocket attack from Gaza and also from Lebanon. But the main attack came from Gaza. And so everybody was in their shelters, so to speak, right? Like the whole country all of a sudden are running to shelters, which was part of their plan. And so imagine I'm putting my family in the bomb shelter, kissing them goodbye, grabbing my military gear, my go bag, and while sirens are going off, while booms are going off over my head, just driving and, go to base and join the team.
Because you have all your gear at home, weapons, ammunition. No. Okay.
No. Yeah. So as a reservist, you don't take your weapon home with you.
Okay.
What you do is you show up to the base where you need to show up, and you sign off on your weapons and your uniforms and whatever. You can have exceptions where you can have like your uniform or your combat vest and different things like that. Basically everything except for a weapon and ammo. Yeah. You can have on ready at home. Your kit, as we call it. So I had my kit, my gear bag with all the toys that guys in my kind of work have, but otherwise you can also just show up with nothing and sign off on everything. Uniform, this, that, whatever kit. But in any which case, so showed up on base, ready to get armed so that we could help in the defense of this onslaught. It was extremely surreal. I've never had a call up like this ever in my military career. I have over 20 years of military experience, and so for me this was a first. I've been in basically every major war that Israel has fought in since 2003. And this was definitely a first. You have the Second Lebanon War. There was a big conflict for us. But again, this was on a whole different level. Mainly because it wasn't that the military was going to war. It was that our citizens were in the war zone. Our home became the war zone. Our FOB, Forward Operating Base, the first forward operating base after we got armed and got our orders, was in a Jewish community just outside the Gaza Strip. So to me, that is a first. You never use your civilian population for military operations. That's not how we operate, at least. And for us, that was a first. Imagine sleeping in a school and setting up positions in a school in a Jewish community, and as you drive into that community, you have a Toyota Hilux, like burnt up because it was one of the few that got actually taken out, and you have what's called a technical, which is basically a heavy machine gun mount on the back of the pickup, for the terrorists to shoot at all these people with 50 caliber rounds. This is the type of attack that you had in your home, okay? Terrorists that we're used to engaging on the battlefield in their battle space where they're, conducting their operations, and here it's actually in your backyard. It's your wife, it's your kids, it's your neighbor, there are men that had to fight, right, who their wife, kid, whoever got murdered, tortured, what have you. This is surreal. Never happened before in my knowledge of the time that we have been fighting in wars, and at least in my lifetime. And
but does that mean that you sort of, until 7th of October, believe there were some rules to the conflict with Hamas and the Palestinians in general? That you thought it would be conducted, more military on military, or at least armed men against armed men, and that this sort of took you by surprise in Israel?
No. People in my field of work know very well the capabilities of the enemy. We know very well the evil that is in their heart and their intent. So we were not surprised at all. What it was is just more of a complexity to you as a warfighter to have to get over the fact that you have been invaded. Like a Red Dawn attack. That's the difference, So we know the enemy. We know what they're capable of. We know what's in their heart, in the intent of their heart to do to us, to our people. So that was not a surprise. The multi-front war, that was also not a surprise. My unit and many other units have been preparing and training for multi-front conflict for years. So we have contingencies. We have our plans. We have our training. We know what to do in these cases of emergency. It's just that this was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. We had, just to give people a ballpark and understand what we're talking about, in the beginning we said it was 3,000 terrorists that crossed into Israel. It was actually, the new numbers that are being revealed now is actually 6,000 terrorists. Okay? So you had 6,000 armed, and not necessarily all armed, but mostly armed. At least half of them were terrorist operatives, Hamas, full-blown terrorist trained operatives. And then about the other half-ish, again, these are very rough numbers. To me, the numbers don't matter, honestly. But just to give the scale of the attack, you had about 3,000 plus armed men, and about another 3,000 who were basically in charge of nabbing, raping, murdering, torturing whoever they could get their hands on. So in other words, assistance, if you like, to the terrorists, right? Yeah. So these were civilian sympathizers who are like, we're going with you, like, because they saw this. It was like a frenzy,
They were not let in on the plans, but they just participated.
They participated, because they saw, and they're like, yeah, we want to get some Jewish blood on our hands too. Yeah. And that was the crazy thing, is that you just had this hodgepodge batch, of full-blown terrorists, and just random people with whatever they could get their hands on, to use for weapons to go murder Jews. And that was the reality. And using their vehicles, using their pickups, using their mopeds, etc.
But have you immediately after this, there was, this amazement that it could happen without detection from Israeli intelligence services. And, the latest sort of scheme that mostly is put on Mossad in order to, blow up these pagers and these walkie-talkies, sort of is testament to the abilities of Israeli intelligence, and that sort of they are renowned for their capabilities in that sense. And people were, to some extent, including myself, and I do have intelligence background, that it wasn't, I guess to some extent they did detect the plan, but it didn't sort of enter into an analytic realization that it would actually happen. Well, how have you yourself, and someone then speculated afterwards that it would create some kind of a distrust or uncertainty among the ranks in Israel, both military and civilian, about the ability of the intelligence apparatus to actually, forewarn about this kind of incident. How has that played out? How has the fact that it could happen, and come as a surprise, how has that affected you? How has that affected the intelligence apparatus? How has that played out? How has the fact that it could happen, that it could happen and come as a surprise, how has that affected you? That it could happen, and come as a surprise, how has that affected the intelligence apparatus? That it could happen and come as a surprise, how has that affected you? in the sense that both how we operate, but also in terms of the morale.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it wasn't a failure to detect the capabilities, the planning, and that something was brewing. That's not the case. What it was is that information wasn't shared with the decision makers that could create a response to those attacks. And so unfortunately, whoever, again, I don't want to share these conspiracies because it's really stuff that I'm hearing from different sources that I believe are reliable, but because I don't have a full grasp of exactly what went wrong, but what I can tell you is that for sure the intelligence was not the problem is the intelligence was not being pushed down the line, or rather up the line. And the opposite is the officers in charge of the lower ranking soldiers, mainly these young ladies who operate in these control rooms, who do observations, because they're considered to be some of the best observers and being able to notice anything that is out of the ordinary. And so when they reported their reportings and concerns, then their officer essentially, this is one of the things that has been publicized in Israel and made public, so this isn't conspiracy at all, is that they reported it and they were threatened to, like, basically leave me alone with this. Don't bring this up again, or else I'm going to, give you a punishment. And so it's like this officer, whoever this officer is, the question mark, is essentially threatening the position of these young girls because he's not interested, or because whatever. It's not very clear why. What was the motive? What's the purpose? What are you trying to do, right? And so what I'm saying is we trust ourselves, yeah? So the guys in my unit, for example, we all have different political backgrounds. We come from different ethnic backgrounds, if you like, as well. So we have a lot of reason to be different and to not work together. Yet we put all those things aside when we put on our uniform, because we're professionals. And we put all those things aside to accomplish a mission together, because collectively, with our teamwork, we know that we are an efficient machine. But when we're fighting each other or nagging each other because of politics or whatever, that's stupid, right? And I think most of the military, that's just not my unit alone, but most of the military has done exactly that, at least in the warfighting community that I have contact with, that I've been operating with. I don't really know what it's, what the atmosphere is with the non-combatant soldiers, so I can't really say for them, people sitting in intelligence rooms or what have you, right? But in that community, you have religious, you have secular, you have different ethnicities, etc. And every one of them is, to my knowledge, have put everything aside for the one goal, which is to defend our citizens and to do everything in our power to do that. While at the same time, you better believe that we are questioning our leadership. We're questioning those in positions, in key positions, that were supposed to feed us the information that we needed to be able to carry our operations and to actually prevent what we found ourselves in, a post-October 7th. So for sure, there's a lot of criticism to our leadership, both militarily and politically. So many of us are definitely pointing fingers, if you like, questioning. But at the same time, the unifying factor amongst all of us is that we're here to defend our community, our people. Let's get this over with, and then we can discuss who did wrong, who did bad, and make sure people's heads roll. Because heads need to roll after this war is over. Heads need to roll. That's not a question.
But what you say that you were not really surprised by what Hamas did, in a sense, that they were so brutal and that they were going in and going after civilian the way that they did. But how do you explain their hatred towards Jews, towards Israel? How do you explain that anger, frustration, that, you know, in a sense, what motivates someone to go in and kill indiscriminately, and as most think are most plausible, knowing that the reaction will be a lot of killed of your own people, of the Palestinians, with the response? How do you explain that to yourself about the motivation of the enemy?
Well, it's not that I have to explain it to myself. It's just simple observation. When you observe the brainwashing, the propaganda that they have been brought up on since childhood, since being small toddlers. You know, there was a documentary done back in 2003, I believe, by, and I believe also a British documentary team that went into Gaza during the time I was first operating in Gaza, back in already in that time. And so they went to actually do a documentary on the effects of war on the children, both on the Palestinian and Israeli sides. And the documentary team started in Gaza. And they started to follow all these families and listen to them and their story and trying to document this, yeah? And then the goal was to end up doing the same on the Israeli side. But because the team did something very stupid, they went and approached an Israeli APC, armored personnel vehicle, that had been under attack by terrorists. And so because the soldiers in there were trying to target and defend themselves and fire towards the terrorists, and these documenters happened to be in the vicinity of that gun battle, the cameraman thought it was a good idea to walk up to this APC wearing a helmet, and this is at nighttime, wearing a helmet and a vest, approaching this vehicle, assuming that somehow they can see that it says press on you and that you have a blue helmet, you know? And so fortunately, this guy takes a bullet to his neck, you know, and bleeds out and dies. And it's a very unfortunate end, right? And then the whole project basically comes to a halt, because now it's like, okay, crap, you know, we lost our one of our main people for this documentary. So that's what they published for this documentary film, is all these interactions of the Palestinian side and them interviewing and talking to these young kids and the parents and so on. And what I find is interesting about what you see in this film, already back then in 2003, before Hamas took full control of the Gaza Strip, before they were able to have full control of propaganda, of income, food, electricity, water, anything that basically controls the population in a full, iron fist style control, which is today, already back then, I'll never forget this young girl. She could barely speak. And she was saying, Aliod, kill the Jew. This little girl, like 4 years old or something. And it blew my mind as a young man back then, going, holy crap, I can't believe this is how you're teaching your kids? Are you for real? She's never met a Jew. And because the guy asked her, have you ever met a Jew, the documentarist? These European-minded, who think that the people in our region think like you do, right? Have the same mentality as you do. And that's your problem, is you don't understand the mentality of the Middle East. You don't understand how these people think. They're not on the same playing field as you are at all. And so these guys are kind of shocked. They're like, holy crap, this young girl just is like talking like a psychopath. And he said, have you ever met a Jew? No, but if I do, I'll kill him. Little girl. So imagine that was back then in 2003. And then today, every compound that we entered, every place that we've been, okay, civilian, not talking about Hamas headquarters, civilian homes have mugs with, like you have Christmas mugs. So I saw gift wrap, a box of, like 20 odd, some odd or so gift wrapped mugs, and those mugs had this terrorist, with the green band on their head, armed, wearing their vests, and then rockets behind them facing towards Israel. And this is a classic Hamas, mug propaganda of showing your support for Hamas. So you have that. You have school cards, like your grades, and the folder of that, right, of this thing has Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas. Okay, so Yasser Arafat, who is essentially the founder of this propaganda mindset that has been seeping into the Arab minds of these Arabs since childhood, that you're a Palestinian, that this is your land, and that you're going to overpower the Jew and you're going to take what's yours. So it's combined with this mindset of entitlement, and the absolute exclusion of any claim of the Jewish side, any of the archaeology, history, and whatnot. Okay, and the shared claim to the land, rather, it's just a one-way road. They have zero, it's ours. So it's combined with this propaganda that he's actually the founder of, and he proudly says it. That they didn't have a I forget how he exactly says it, but he basically says, I will give them this vision. I'm going to create the Palestinian cause, and he really did that. That's where it starts. So pre-1964, there isn't a Palestinian cause. It's a trans-Arabic cause, which is anti-Jewish, which is anti any non-Islamic control in the Middle East, which is really what started most of all these conflicts. But it transferred from that to Palestinian, which is not Arab. Okay, they're and all the Arabs in the Middle East, they're Arabs. Okay, they come from tribes from Egypt, from Syria, from Lebanon, Iraq, etc. So how is it that these people who come from all these other Arab countries surrounding the land of Israel, who have made immigration throughout the years, different wars, etc., now all of a sudden they have this new identity and they have this new cause? So combine that with radical Islamic Muslim Brotherhood teachings that is stemming from Egypt mainly, and then with lots of support from Turkey, which is one of the number one countries in the world who prescribes these radical teachings for the imams to preach in the mosques in Israel, including in the Palestinian territories. So in both of these mosques, both in Israeli control area and Palestinian control areas, they're sending the script. And it's the radicalized Islamist preaching of kill the Jew, first the Sabbath people, then the Sunday people. So that is what is being taught to these people, and like I said, from young ages. And now it's full-blown. It's full-blown. Post the pullout of Gaza in 2005, everyone has been radicalized. They're basically brainwashed zombies who have wholesale believed the Palestinian myth of statehood, of nationality, of whatever, even though none of them can tell me what is the first capital of Palestine. Who is your first leader, ruler that you've ever had? Yeah? What is the Palestinian language that's ethnically specific to you? That's so what is so unique to you? Food, anthem, anything? They don't have that. Yeah?
But when you say it's full blown,
yeah.
I mean, there has been a few sort of clips on social media, at least early after the bombardment from the Israeli side started on Gaza after 7th of October, of some local Palestinians swearing at Hamas and sort of criticizing Hamas for the Israeli counterattack. But I mean, my sense from sort of knowing conflict areas and conflict dynamic and how things play out and how the sort of the Palestinian, the Arab psyche, and also how Islam works. My estimation is that that number is quite small, and from what you're saying, you sort of, that's your experience as well. That sort of, it's the majority, and we're talking perhaps, could you set a number of it, that have sort of completely accepted this version of reality, this propaganda as you call it. Are we talking about 90%, 95%, 99%? I mean, in every society there are some dissidents to the established narrative. So I guess, you know, there will be some. But how significant is that number of people in Gaza that are opposed to the Hamas propaganda narrative, in your estimation, approximately?
Yeah. It is very hard to put numbers to it because they are very heavily guarded, you know, community, if you will, from our influence and our daily life and so on. But my estimate from my observation on the battlefield, at least, and from just every interview that we've had, or rather interrogation of every terrorist that's come into our hands, and non-terrorists, that we then realize, okay, so this person, you know, it happened to be the wrong person, the wrong time, you know, and we send them back. But when you have when you gather this information from any one of them, they are all 100% for the cause. Like, we haven't really had any encounters with people that have said, oh, we're so happy that you've, you know, relieved us from our occupation of this terrorist regime. I haven't heard it from any of them. I haven't seen it. But just like you, I've seen footage of people who are, you know, filming themselves basically pissed off with Hamas. So I look at it like this. Either it's propaganda that Hamas wants you and me to see, and then therefore also to kind of give this idea we don't control the whole of the society, when the reality on the ground is quite obvious. And again, when you understand the Middle East and the neighborhood that we live in, the Arab society is based off of an honor system. And that is very extreme and important to their values. Okay? You know, we value law and order. To them, number one is the honor system. So to be dishonored in your society is a very, very big blow, and it's generational. Like, your whole family, if you're the one who basically dishonored the family, you risk that your whole family is going to carry that stain of that dishonor, and basically you'll never recover from it. And that's very serious in their culture, in their community. Hamas has made sure that everybody is basically pro them through either violence, intimidation, torture, and we're very well familiar with that. In fact, one of the most invested facilities that I saw in Gaza that had a lot of money put into it, and clearly it's a very high-end facility, was their prison. They had like a maximum security prison in Gaza, and I remember asking the guys, like, why do these guys have a maximum security prison? Like, what, for Gazans? Like for who? Who is going to go? Like, who are they going to put in there, right? Because really, it's like a Wild West. You know, there is no real law and order. The only law is Hamas and some terrorist groups that might want to, you know, try to show that they're also strong. But again, it's a law of the bully. You know, the one who controls this neighborhood is the one with the biggest stick. That's the only law. And so you know what I mean. So you ask yourself, you're like, so who in the world is going to be in there? And of course, we discovered later, because our operations took us into those areas, is that you had a bunch of prisoners who are starving in there. They're not getting their food. They're not getting what they need. And these were political prisoners. So political. In other words, they didn't agree with, you know, they might have said something slight, you know, made some kind of murmuring towards, you know, maybe they lost their home or whatever, right? Something that would be legitimate, like protest of, you know, this sucks, this isn't right. And because you didn't express it in the right way and somehow you defamed Hamas, you go to that prison. And now they're going to torture you and whatever. And or a lot of the people that end up in there are people that are, and this is the worst. This is the ultimate worst in their culture. That's it. Now you're burnt for life. Is what we call mashtapim, or people who basically are traitors to the people. Yeah. And the way you in mashtap is meaning that you're a traitor cooperating with Israel. Yeah. You're a spy for Israel. Yeah. You're telling Israel where the terrorists are, where the this is. So then you're going to get
of course, I mean, but those kind of traitors are sort of, I mean, any society that sort of are set about to sort of protect its border or whatever structure they have will have to deal with traitors harshly.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you say one thing is Gaza and the sentiments in Gaza, but what about in the West Bank? Are there much of a difference between the Palestinians living in the West Bank contra those living in Gaza? Do they have a different opinion on, or a more benevolent opinion about Israel in the West Bank than they do in Gaza? What's your sense?
That's a very good question, because actually there is a big difference. The Arabs living in the West Bank and the ones living under Palestinian control, the PA, as it's known, the Palestinian Authority. Because you have Israeli communities and that's under Israeli control, and then you have Palestinian communities that are under Palestinian control, and then you have areas that are in between, okay? So it's kind of shared by both, kind of like your gray area, so to speak, in this landmass. So what you do have in these areas, unlike Gaza, there are no Jewish communities, there's no interaction with Israelis, except for before the war, we had roughly about 100,000 Palestinians from Gaza working with work permits in Israel every day, which those Gazans then collected intelligence for the attack on October 7th that was very precise, down to this is the name of who lives here, this is what they work in. They could tell if they were Shabak or Mossad, so in those communities as well. I mean, like very detailed information, who's armed, who's not, where's their bomb shelter, so they know, so the terrorists can basically go straight to the bomb shelters because of the attacks that they did with the rockets, right? So that was the whole plan, basically.
I see.
So very detailed. So you had those, and they have obviously some interaction with Israelis, and they know that Israel isn't like as demonically evil as they're told. But again, that's very difficult for you if you have a racist, like here in Europe is maybe the closest thing that you might have. You have somebody who's like a racist, a neo-Nazi, whatever. They're very kind of demented in their thinking, and even though they live amongst other ethnic groups in their society, they have a clear hatred towards those people, irregardless if they're nice, if they're hospitable, if they're, whatever that would make them a pleasant person, and the contrary to your directed hatred towards them simply because of their race and their ethnicity, right? So imagine you have someone like this, but again on steroids, and both backed with a very radical Islamist ideology, then it really doesn't matter how much of an interaction you have. But the ones in Judea, Samaria, in the West Bank, there's a different sentiment there because there's less of that propaganda, less of that full-blown control. And because of that, and then plus about, I would say, 80 to 90% of the workforce in factories in the West Bank that are Jewish-owned factories or Israeli-owned factories, the workforce are Palestinians, 80 to 90%. So and they get equal opportunity, the same pay as an Israeli, etc. So what that means is they benefit from the Israeli economy, which is about 5 times the salary that you would get working in anything similar in the PA controlled areas. So they enjoy 5 times the salary. They enjoy, not being in a society that's extremely violent and extremely, basically constant on edge of, you know what I mean? Don't mess with the wrong terrorist entity, because you have Hamas guys, you have all these other terrorist groups as well in the West Bank. And so you don't want to bump into those people, and you also don't want to be known as the guy who works in Israel every day and makes your decent salary so you can provide for your family. So those people have a different relationship with Jews because they work with Jews. And so there is I think, because of that, there's more of a humanity behind the demon that's been portrayed to you there. And again, it's less controlled. And so if you ask, from honest conversations that I've seen, at least, that have been had with those Palestinians, their view of Jews is not as bad, and they are very appreciative of their opportunity that they have. And so they actually would rather to have the Jewish business to work for, knowing that if the PA had taken over that, then they go back to a lowered income, because the whole point of these terrorist entities is not to encourage entrepreneurship within your community, but quite the opposite, so that you can direct the society towards terrorism in one way or other. So, okay, you're not going to be the guy who carries a weapon or blows yourself up, but can you give us intelligence on Israel? Can you aid and abet terrorists in your home? Because you're clean and none of your family have been reported to the Israeli intelligence community as terrorist sympathizers, as having any terrorist relatives who have been involved in terrorism. You know what I'm saying? So it's like they use the society in one way or other, and that's the only way for them to survive. So either you're going to play along with them and get financial benefits, and or you try to work in Israel. But then again, some of them who work in Israel have been threatened with their lives when they come back into their homes. You work for the Jew. And I know this firsthand stories where they worked in a Jewish community and then got beaten an inch from their life, and then didn't show up the next day to continue the job they were at, only to discover weeks later that they showed up all bruised and beaten up, and basically saying, listen, I'm not going to work anymore, but thank you for, thank you for letting me work here, and I'm disappearing, So what I'm saying, it's a very hard dynamic. So, hopefully that makes some sense for people.
Yeah, it's around 20 plus years ago, and up until, say, 2011, 12, in the West, it was this, this military project of counterinsurgency based after 9/11, and then the invasion of Afghanistan, and then Iraq. I was part of it in a sense, and both part of analyzing how this would sort of play out. I never believed in the project in either Iraq or Afghanistan from our side, but they were talking about then winning hearts and minds. Stanley McChrystal in Helmand province talked about a government in a box that should be sort of rolled out in these areas, and then as part of, by through giving services, winning the hearts and minds of the people. We had then also this sort of this numbers game about how many soldiers do you need compared to the civilian population in order to pacify and do that counterinsurgency, which meant, I think it was 1 to 20. We would have to have 1.5 million people in Afghanistan, soldiers at least, in order to sort of just theoretically be able. I don't think we would have made it even with 20 million soldiers in Afghanistan, because people saw the Western forces as occupiers. And that creates a dynamic whereby group cohese, loyalties, the enemy. This is sort of group dynamics for humanity and Homo sapiens for tens of thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of years. Given that sort of background which you have been talking about now, about the hatred and the propaganda and how they see Israelis and Jews basically having stolen their lands or their forefathers' lands, etc. Given that background, how do you see the purpose of the military operations that you're carrying out in say, firstly now Gaza? Then I mean, I saw a report from the Institute of War Studies, I think it's called, which in their assessment that the IDF had defeated, I used that word, defeated Hamas in Khan Yunis and were close to doing it in Rafah. But they say, but they have not destroyed Hamas. They defeated their ability to conduct operations, to communicate, stuff like that. But they hadn't sort of broken Hamas, in the sense that Hamas might or will come up again, will be able in the future to re-establish themselves. And that, from my looking at the situation in Israel, with Gaza, with the West Bank, say with Gaza, is that, and the IDF have been sort of, one have been talking about this in a sense that it's like mowing the lawn or cutting the grass. This, from time to time, operations that are conducted and debilitates the forces of the enemy, but they will come back. Unless you then, as was discussed by some of the more hawkish elements of Netanyahu's government, that the solution here is basically that other countries take in the population, the Palestinians in Gaza. Firstly, to Egypt, in a sense that to eradicate Hamas. And then sort of the counter-arguments of that was that, well, if they are let into Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula while the IDF conduct this operation, the IDF and the Israelis will never let them back in. And it will be sort of ethnic cleansing. Mm-hmm. And that's of course sort of unacceptable terms to sort of even be discussing as political options these days. But given what you're saying, and you're not the only one who's saying this about the hatred and the propaganda, there will never be peace between Palestinians and Israelis and Jews in this area, with this situation of Gaza, the West Bank, no settled sort of situation that's accepted in terms of borders, sovereignty, etc. How do you see that in that are you more optimistic that in a sense in the future there might actually be reconciliation and that you can live side by side, either in two separate states or within one state or whatever the solution is? Do you see any hope? I mean, within sort of your lifetime, your kids' lifetime, your grandkids' lifetime, that there will be reconciliation? Or will there be constant military operations, terrorist raids, hostilities, you know, if the situation is not settled by some other means, you know, that by someone simply leaving the territory to the other part?
Mm-hmm. I think really the simplest solution to bring about a normal relationship between us and the Palestinians, or rather the Arabs living in Gaza, in the West Bank, the only way we can come to any type of normalcy is by destroying and crushing the head of the snake. To crush the head of the snake means that somehow, through whatever planned, initiative, if you will, Iran needs to fall. I'm not talking about the Iranian people. The Iranian people are actually oppressed and some of the most oppressed and terrorized people group in the world. They need to be freed from the mullahs, these demonically minded psychopaths who, at the expense of their own people, are willing to continually bombard Israel through proxies like the Hamas terror group, like Hezbollah, and like ISIS, etc. All of these groups, they are constantly funded and trained, because a lot of them also train in their special training areas, including now the former military bases that the U.S. left behind in Afghanistan, that I'm aware of, that have been now basically transformed into great. Now these are our training facilities and so on, right? Mm-hmm. So the high-end training, the high-end funding, the constant narrative of this very radical Islamist ideology, it all stems from them at the head of being the head of the snake, and Turkey. The problem is that Turkey is a NATO nation. And of course, that is politically a hot topic. Do we cut them out of NATO? My answer is, unless they get a leader who is got a normal mindset and isn't a radical and wants to join in with the mullahs of Iran, absolutely, you need to cut them out of NATO. And you treat them like a terrorist nation led by a psychopath. That's your problem. Because these entities are the ones who are putting all of this pressure and funding to the bad guys in the control of the Palestinians. The Palestinian people are just like any other people. They're people that like you and me, who want food, shelter, safety, and security. That's something that we can share, that we do share, and that we can come to terms with if they're not under a cloud of this fear and intimidation funded by and led by these groups. So but, you get what I'm saying?
But I wasn't aware of that Turkey now plays that role in terms of funding the schools or the madrasas and the propaganda. But it reminds me about the role that Saudi Arabia used to play.
Yes.
From the 90s onwards. I guess there is another regime there now, so that has some different priorities. But then what you can say, Saudi Arabia has let up some of that activity, but then it's taken over by Turkey. And if you look at it, Turkey is still the most, one of the most secular Islamic countries in the world still. There is still a significant secular anti-Islamic streak in Turkey. But even then, they are able to play the role that you describe. And when it comes to Iran, I mean, what strikes me is that if there is not Iran and Turkey say magically these regimes were to fall and someone else were to come in, given the roots of the problem ideologically speaking, or perhaps even religiously speaking here, there will be someone else. Or if there is not someone else doing it, the Palestinians or the Arabs in that area will do it on their own. They will, the hatred towards Jews among the population surrounding you in Israel will not go away. I mean, that's my honest assessment. Even if Iran is taken out, even if Turkey changes course, there will be someone else. Because it's so deep-rooted. It's deep-rooted in Islamic theology, in Islamic history, in terms of what happened in Medina, and the support that the Prophet Muhammad claimed that the Jewish tribes, did with his enemies, all this kind of stuff, which is brought up. But also in combination with the narrative that I have a hard time seeing how it will disappear, that there was this Palestinians living there or Arabs living there, and then there was immigration from Jews from the late 19th century onwards, which then took over the country. I mean, this narrative, this historic perception they have will continue to be there, in my opinion. I mean,
yes.
I'm just playing devil's advocate, because what you say is take out the snake's head,
yes,
and then the problem will disappear. But realistically speaking, I mean, in analytical circles in Israel, in political circles in Israel, looking at sort of how do we deal with this strategically in the future, I can't see how you can believe that. Only by, then let's try to muster a coalition against Iran and Turkey and the problem will disappear.
Yeah. So for sure I didn't say that the problem will disappear. Just to be clear, what I'm saying is that if you go for the head of the snake, and I'll put it like this, in more, try to make it in more simple terms. If you make terrorism a unattractive business and commodity, which it is today, by punishing the perpetrators of terrorism and the influencers, if you like, the ones who are influencing their societies, their nations, like Turkey, like Iran, by hitting them with a very heavy hand, then the ones who end up filling that gap, because there will be a gap, there will be a void, and the void is always filled by someone else. And you're right, the question is, who's the someone else? And what I'm saying is that if you make it unprofitable for that someone else, because they realize that the West, if the West regains its desire to win wars, because that's the thing, we have lost our desire to win a war. We forget that to win a war, it means very heavy-handed consequences to those who threaten us. So if Iran threatens us and the world stops playing political correctness in the heavy-handedness, and we hit them heavy, and those who have the power to do it, United States, Israel, other European countries, England, etc., Canada, Australia, if these nations are given the green light to hit with a heavy hand towards these mullahs, towards these psychopaths, just like we did with Nazi Germany, right? There's an allied force unified against what threatened us all. The problem today is, because of politics, because of political correctness, because of people who want to put their head in the sand, we're not willing to pay the price of winning a war. And it's a heavy-handed strike towards those who threaten us.
But how do you foresee that a strike against Iran on the proportions that you're talking about, in order to sort of, because you're removing the mullah regime from power, what would it take, in your opinion, to do that militarily?
Militarily, just like we did with Saddam Hussein, you show up on his doorstep, and you basically let him know, like, you're not in control anymore. The difference is that the vacuum that was left post what the United States did in 2003 in Iraq, they left a mess behind. They put weak leadership in power. People that the people in that country did not respect, did not honor, because remember, it's an honor system. And that's the big mistake. You have to have people who understand the culture, the people, and know who is the right person that can fill in that gap. Same in Afghanistan, with the pullout from Afghanistan. You have on the Sean Ryan show, for example, on his podcast, he interviewed the son of who should have been the rightful leadership in Afghanistan, but because of they fell on the wrong political side of the West, they got sidelined. And so these are people that can testify from their own experience as to, if we were in power, right, we serve what the people want and need as far as leadership, and we're not into radicalized jihadi ideology. So, for example, Afghanistan will look completely different if the U.S. played their cards right, or the West. Technically, it's not just the U.S. at fault, but they were at the head of those forces. And the same with Iraq, right? You put wrong leadership, and you left a gap in control in that area, and then it all goes back to square one, basically. So it's just, you have to do it correctly. That's the thing.
But we talk...
And it has been done.
But
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, but I mean...
It's just the gap that was left behind.
Yeah, but I mean...
is the mess.
I mean, you could say that, but I mean, with just the invasion aspect of it.
Yeah.
I mean, Iraq, I guess at that time, had around 25 million people. It was flat desert from Kuwait into Baghdad. With Iran, we're talking about, you're saying showing up at their doorstep. I think there are around 80 million people there now. It's a mountainous country. I've been to Iran, traveled around there for a couple of weeks. At the moment, that was back in 2008. At that time, my estimation was that the regime only perhaps had support of around 15 to 20% of the people. The rest of the Iranian people were sort of quite disappointed. Didn't really support the regime. They were not that really religiously motivated. You can sense the Indo-European streak to the Persian culture. They're not Arabs. And it makes actually a difference in terms of the culture and sort of the affinity to the West. But I would think that if there was to be an invasion, say we had the means, I don't think we have the means either, but say we had it, I think more of the Iranians would coalesce around those opposing the invaders, so that the support for the regime that we would like to topple would increase by an invasion. The other aspect, look, I can agree with you that we have lost in the West the ability to win wars. Perhaps not in Israel, insofar as you include Israel in the West in that side, because you are still threatened. I mean, you still feel that you sort of do have to respond militarily. So it's a different sentiment in Israel than it is in the rest of the West. But we are not even able to provide the Ukrainians with enough ammunition and weapons in order to fight the Russians, although our combined economies are many, many, many times more than the Russians. There's simply no ability, or willingness to muster the resources to have someone else fight a war for us, the Ukrainians, against the Russians. And to imagine now that we would be able to muster 1 million people, sending them down to the Persian Gulf and invading Iran, it's not going to happen. And I would say it shouldn't happen. I mean, I would not be willing to go down there and die in order to try to fight the mullahs in Iran. So, I mean, if that is the plan in Israel, that we need to, in order to solve your problem, the regime in Iran is going to have to be toppled. I mean, that's not going to happen. I mean, that's my realistic assessment. It's not, we in the West, in the rest of the West, are not going to join Israel in a massive invasion of Iran. Do you have a different assessment about that?
Well, first of all, this is my personal opinion. It's not the opinion of the Israelis. No. Just to be clear, what I just told you. This is my personal opinion. And I think your problem here in the West, if you like, and the reason why you lack the will to win wars, including in Israel, we lack the will to win wars. And we have been conducting our last few wars that I've been involved in that same sentiment. So the Second Lebanon War, we went in, we hit a heavy blow to Hezbollah, and then we came back and, job done. And I know for the majority of the war fighters, we came back frustrated and pissed off that we wasted our time, our lives, shed blood, sweat, and tears, literally, for nothing. What did we get out of that? How many of our civilians were displaced and homes destroyed by the rockets and this and that and whatever? All of this effort to just find ourselves back into right now.
Yeah, but I mean, you bought yourself some years. It took some time for Hezbollah to sort of rebuild their stock. I mean, that's sort of the argument of this mowing the lawn, strategy that, because short of completely removing them from the territory, I mean, short of that, to mow the lawn from time, cut the grass from time to time is sort of the only other military option you have. The third option is to do nothing, just let them build up their forces, threatening Israel.
Yeah. I don't believe in mowing the lawn. I believe in uprooting what is a problem from its root. That's my personal opinion, and I think that's the opinion of many others like myself who share this opinion, that you have to uproot a problem from the root. Unless you deal with the root, you're going to keep dealing with the grass, as you call it, that keeps growing and keeps pestering you every so often. When you eradicate it from the root, you eliminate that threat. You finish with it. You can have peace and security. Again, you're not going to have full peace and security because, again, there's always a vacuum. And the question that remains is the day after you've uprooted the root of the problem, who's going to fill that vacuum? And so that's always the real question. And I think that's really the concern that we need to be concerned with if we actually had the will to do what it takes to go all in with a war. Like right now, all of my guys and all the warfighters that I know, we're all committed to go all in. We've left our families, we've left our jobs. We are dealing with the ramifications of those consequences, both financially, emotionally, children, this, that, all of those things and pressures that we're carrying in order to get our hostages back, in order to regain safety and security for the communities from the Gaza envelope, and regaining safety, security for the 80,000+ Israelis who have been displaced from the north. And have had their homes, have had their businesses, have had whatever that has been left behind come to utter ruin by constant rocket fire coming from Hezbollah in the north. So this needs to stop. And you can't just stop it by mowing the lawn. Hezbollah has proven to us that from our last conflict in 2014 with them, you're back to square one. Again, it was, in Gaza, but they wanted to get involved, and they made some provocations already back in 2014, post the 2006 Second Lebanon War,
But if
that's a huge concern.
Take Gaza a bit separately from Lebanon, and then look at sort of the operational aspects of this.
Yeah.
From you guys who have actually been on the ground there and fighting, what does victory look like? What is possible? What have you done so far? Because the number of Israeli soldiers killed is still less than 300 in this operation, right?
No, it's over 700 actually.
Is it over 700 in the conflict in Gaza now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, that is a significant number. But the fighting there, is that sort of man to man? I mean, is it small arms fighting small groups? I mean, Hamas terrorists popping up, shooting. Is that, or do most of the Hamas fighters get killed by explosive bombs, drones, stuff like that? Do they engage you in fighting, man to man, in Gaza, or is it like they constantly trying to evade contact with the IDF? What is it like to fight there? What kind of fighting are we talking about really in Gaza? Firstly, and then if you combine that with the sense of, so what does victory look like, and how do you control the territory after Hamas is sort of basically taken out? And then we can move on to Lebanon.
Yeah. So the way the conflict is being the way it's being conducted right now in Gaza is that we send our troops to weed out the terrorists from the civilian infrastructure that they're using for their for firing rockets into Israel, for shooting RPGs at tanks or any of the personnel that are moving of our military, including IEDs, and so and booby traps of all kinds that you can imagine.
So you're clearing above ground.
It's mostly so it's above ground, and then you have the underground operations, which are clearing hundreds of kilometers of tunnel systems. So to give people a little bit of perspective of what I have to deal with, when I'm in Gaza with the military and doing operations, my constant concern in everything that is in the back of my mind, so to speak, is that the terrorists can pop up at any corner of any square meter that we step our feet on, anywhere here. It's not like the battle is fenced into this small area.
They can pop up everywhere.
They can literally pop up everywhere. So that is already a mental frustration for the warfighter, is that you're threatened at any given moment and from any given direction, not just underground but above ground. Buildings that have been hit and targeted because of suspicious activity, and then you have sniper fire coming out of rubble, coming out of a place that has already been hit. There's already been not cleared 100%, but it's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like you're no matter where your eyes are looking, there's a threat at any given moment. We've had sniper threat, like I said, RPG, this, that, what have you. But just to give a perspective of the tunnel system, which is our greatest problem that we're up against, we have to clear 640 kilometers of tunnel system. Okay? Just to give you a perspective, and I'll just look up the numbers and make sure I'm telling you the exact numbers. So Israel, just to give people an idea, Israel is 420 kilometers long from northern tip to down to Eilat. 420 kilometers. The Gaza Strip is 42 kilometers long, by maybe, let's say, 12 kilometers wide at its widest, give or take, plus minus. So 42 kilometers, you have 640 kilometers of underground tunnel system in that small strip of land. That's what I'm up against. That's what your warfighter is up against.
Yeah.
It is endless tunnel systems, multi-layered, some narrow enough just to crawl through, some you could drive a truck through it.
But if you can just, when you clear one segment of that tunnel, how do you try to avoid that being sort of reused or retaken?
We destroy them.
How do you destroy them? I mean, do you just blow it up and then they collapse? Is that?
So we have special explosive materials that we use to essentially incapacitate those tunnel systems. And so, first of all, of course, is that we have to clear the tunnel systems to search for our hostages before we destroy a strip of that endless kilometers of underground tunnel system, right? So first is clear it. A lot of them are booby-trapped. You name it. And so you do all the process, right? Making sure that, you clear it properly, hoping that nobody trips any of the booby traps, all that. Once you've cleared that whole area and you know for sure now there's nobody being held here, then we incapacitate that strip of tunnel, right?
And you do it so thoroughly that it cannot be used again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so
that's you do that with all of those tunnels that you clear. You do that. Everyone is destroyed.
Systematically, we try to destroy most all of them. I don't know for sure if we've destroyed all that we've cleared,
Do you know about approximately how many kilometers you have been able to destroy over these months, and how much remains?
I would guess, again, this is a guesstimation, maybe over 100, 200 kilometers, give or take, plus minus. But it's nothing that's publicized, nothing that's made
so
public.
10 to 20 to 30% of it.
Maybe,
the rest remains.
give or take. Yeah. Just again, this is from what I have seen from operations and making a guesstimate. So yeah, I mean, so it's a very, very, very complex warfare that an important point that people need to understand, and this was made by war experts, okay, who have studied wars, who have studied different conflicts, and they've made the point. John Spencer from West Point in the United States, and Lord Robert Andrews, I believe is his name, from England, who is considered to be an absolute expert in war history and research. Both of them have claimed and publicly pointed out that what Israel is up against in Gaza, no military in the world has ever had such a complex war. No military has had to deal with hundreds of miles of underground tunnel systems, with hundreds of their own hostages held in that battle space, with civilian population that is being used as cannon fodder for the enemy. In other words, that the enemy is aiding and abetting themselves within the civilian population, with no regards to the civilian population, and not just no regards, with the absolute intent and hopes that their civilians get killed by the IDF so that they can demonize the IDF and say, look, they're hurting civilians. So it's this multi-layered levels of just insanity that we're up against. Drones, this is also a new threat that we have, is I don't have to just be worried about what's under my feet or any booby traps above ground or snipers taking pot shots at me or RPGs or IEDs, but then there's also the drone threat of a drone dropping an explosive device on top of my unit, on top of my convoy or what have you. So first day of the war, or not first day of the war, but 2 weeks in, the ground operations began. So on the first day of the ground operations, as we were in the rally point with all the tanks and what have you, and units and soldiers and thousands of guys everywhere, the first attack happened already just as we were preparing to enter. A group of soldiers were sitting down having their meal in an open field, unprotected from the sky, and unassuming of the threat that could be lurking from above them. And I'll never forget, because we were there in the rally point, and we see a vehicle rush in, an armored vehicle rush in with the casualties of that strike, that they dropped a mortar on them through a drone. And so it's like reality check. A body bag comes out of that vehicle, and you realize, crap, our first casualty already, just like that, simple as that. And then another poor sucker who was badly wounded, being escorted to the ambulance to get them off the battlefield, and you haven't even started to do nothing yet. And then simultaneously, minutes later, we get the order that we're coming under mortar attack. So you're in an open field, and you just take cover wherever as you're being mortared, targeting your troops. It's like, good morning, Vietnam. Reality check. It's happening, right? So what I'm saying is, psychologically, for the war fighter that is up against all of these threats, it's overwhelming. It's constant. Like every step you take in that battle space, it gets dirty, it gets ugly. But at the same time, we know through every victory, every battalion that we have eliminated from Hamas, we're inching closer, even though, again, it's very slow and methodical, and why it's dragging so long is not just because we're trying to do this in such a way to where we avoid any civilian casualties for the Palestinians, but we have immense pressure coming from the United States, and them withholding the armaments that we need, which is based off of the agreements that we have with them, that when we need it, you're gonna supply it to us, and they're saying no, and they hold back, and then other nations here in Europe doing the same. I know with Germany and so on that are, all of a sudden deciding that they don't want to help us. It's not that we need your help; it's that we have put together defense agreements that we do one part of the development and what have you, and because we could create our own, and we had our own. The Israeli military industry had its own shelling, like creating of shells and whatever we needed for defending ourselves when needed. But then some, back in 2000, these clever ideas of, we don't need to have these big mass storehouses and warehouses for all of these armaments. Let the Americans, help us with that. Let Germany help us. Let other countries that I can't mention help us. And then all of a sudden, it's like playing this stupid politics when people's lives are at risk here. Palestinians who are having to spend another day not in their homes, not going back to their normal, Like for those who care so much about the Palestinians, I'm saying good, me too. Let us finish the job. Let us destroy Hamas so that they can go back to their normal.
So what you're then advocating is saying that operational soldiers is this for this operation to continue like it has been going on, or approximately as it has been going on now for since November of last year, in order to sort of continue that you are successful, but you need more time to finish the job, so to speak, to eradicate Hamas.
The time and the tools. The time and the tools. When you take away the tools for me to finish the mission objective, and you're basically crippling me, you're slowing me down. So we had the initiative 2 weeks into the war. See, already that was a mistake. But again, that was from U.S. pressure saying, nope, 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 holding us back. So we already entered into the response in a disadvantage by not having the carrying starting the initiative and pushing that initiative, because in any war you have to have the initiative and you have to have that momentum and you have to build it until you're done. When you slow down the initiative and you put it to a screeching halt, it destroys the whole of everything you're trying to accomplish. And that's what's been forced upon us time and time again. So it's these short bursts that we keep carrying the initiative and trying to build it up again and dealing with these bureaucracies. So essentially the bottom line is we would have been done by now. That's a fact. We would have been done by now. Months ago we would have been done. But because we're, fighting, so to speak, with our hand tied behind our back, it's preventing us from being able to get this over with. That's the problem.
How is life for the soldiers the IDF soldiers in Gaza? I mean, we know from Ukraine that because of shortage of manpower and difficulty, rotating troops because they get attacked. They spend weeks, even months, in the front lines. Some of these units, they are sort of exhausted. There's no replenishment. Whilst sort of how is the rotation system for IDF soldiers? How long are you sort of in Gaza fighting, and how long time do you get rest before you send back? I mean, is it possible to say some generalizations about that?
Yes and no. So I'm not allowed to talk about the exact rotation and how it works. What I can tell you is that we have an efficient system where we're rotating the war fighters in such a way to where they don't get wore out, where they don't get completely depleted in the battle space. So that, I think, our military has done quite efficiently, and in a as good of a fashion within the circumstances that we find ourselves in the longest ongoing war that Israel's ever had in our history. So it is wearing on us because, again, the rotation is you go, you fight, because you're a civilian, and then you go back to life, to normal, and you're supposed to get back to some kind of normalcy when your normal has been sleeping in a home that is half blown to bits and that is barely standing on its foundations of whatever is left of it, a terror tunnel outside your doorstep if you walk out of that building, and tanks driving by, shaking the thing, and then an airstrike just a few hundred meters from you, right? Waking you up from your few minutes of shut-eye after long hours of operating and whatnot. So it's like, in other words, what I'm saying is it's coming out of this constant tension of any moment could be your last breath that you take, and that there's a threat coming from any which direction, so to speak, to, let's, so what were we doing? Let's look at those, let's look at the, at the chart here, and let's talk about, how the business is going to grow, and you know what I mean? Go back to whatever it was you were doing, and it's like, and then get thrown right back into that rotation of back to, the crazy. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for the warfighters. It's not healthy for the home environment psychologically, right? Because it does take a toll on you. There's no way this doesn't take a toll on you. And the constant collective torture for the society of knowing that we now have 101 hostages, possibly, hopefully, over half of them still alive in Gaza, and that we have direct relationship with the people being held there, either a relative, a friend of, someone that we know, because it's such a small country. It has literally impacted everyone on that psychological level of just torture, right?
How much does the fact that there are still these around 100 hostages left, how much does that hamper your military operation? I mean, how differently would you have been able, and how much more effective would you have been able to be in the fight against Hamas if there were no hostages there? How much does it impact your operations?
It impacts our operations 100%, because if hostages were not being held by these terrorists, then we could go straight for them and just eliminate them without any concerns of a hostage being killed in the process.
Could you
the biggest problem.
Say something specific about how you could have taken out the tunnels differently if there were no hostages there? I mean, there was this talk about flooding the tunnel, stuff like that. I mean, how could you have done it if there were no friendly forces, or friendly people inside the tunnels?
Correct. So that is exactly it. Is that if we knew that we didn't have this as a factor on the battlefield, then the efficiency of destroying these tunnels would just be wholesale. It's just to discover the tunnel and destroy it. I don't need to clear it. So it would have been a lot less of a tedious operation. Because people need to understand, I mean, to clear a tunnel is very, very, very tedious work, very high stress, high intensity for the individuals that have to go in there. You barely have oxygen. You're in the heat of summer with full kit. I can tell you, for me at least, we had heat rashes on our bodies. Your bodies wore out. You got heat exhaustion, like basically the whole team. Because you're wearing helmets, in the heavy heat of summer, gets up to 40 plus degrees, So you're wore out, you're beat up. Now add to this, going into a tunnel where you're fighting for oxygen, and you're trying to keep your level head, you're trying to keep your wits about you, looking for booby traps. The units that do that work is extremely complex, extremely difficult, and it's tedious. It is not just a willy-nilly go in, okay, clear, next room. It's a very difficult job. So absolutely, it would completely shift the way we had to handle this. It would just be to discover a tunnel, to implement the destructive method that we use to destroy the tunnel, the end. You know? And yeah, I mean, that would have changed everything 100%. And they know that. That was part of the plan.
Let's get ourselves some more coffee and then we'll continue.
Okay.
Good. We have been able to refill our cups of coffee and then get on with a very interesting conversation. Firstly, you spoke about your you were brought up in the north of Israel, very close to the border with Lebanon. And for you, reality was that there was rockets. You had people around you being killed, injured by rockets coming from Lebanon. Now you have been basically in the military for over 20 years, and also as a reservist, you have been fighting all of Israel's war since 2003. You are now engaged in the war in Gaza. And you said that it was stressful. It's stressful, it's hot, it's exhausting, you have threats all over. How well is a modern human adapted to being in war in that sense? And I'm asking on the background of thinking in a sense that if you look at our past, I think that the research now gives us an indication that these early, the hunter-gatherer societies that we encountered in the 60s, up in the 70s, and also before that, and then extrapolating that back to the past, were very violent. I think it's as much as some of the cases, 30-40% of the men in those in those societies died violently. So in a sense, what I've been sort of speculating is that we are in a sense adapted to dealing with living in an environment with threats and insecurity, which to some extent make the modern experience with the state monopoly on violence and no war for most people being rather the exception. And that to some extent, and I've spoken also with people, especially in the Balkans, in the Bosnian War, and men that sort of came out of that, and to some extent looked back on the time in war with some kind of, I say fondness, but they appreciated certain aspects of being both individually as soldiers in war, but also what it did to the society and to the mentality of the society and the relationship with people who, in a sense, were joined together in that experience of war. What do you think about that? I mean, do you feel that it's manageable for most of your fellow soldiers, men and women, to be in war? Do you cope with it mentally? And what does it do to the society? Are there some positive, in a sense, aspect to being in war and being occasionally under threat?
Definitely, I would say that being exposed to life-threatening realities creates a resilience in any person. It can actually go two different ways, really. One can be a positive where it builds you and makes you resilient. The negative, if not managed properly, it can lead to actually breakdown and mental stress, PTS, and unfortunately it ends up leading to then people taking their lives. So for me, this is actually a very serious topic that for me is of huge concern. I personally have known one person that was a fellow teammate in work that I've done in the past that ended up taking his life, and this was before the war, but ended up taking his life because of just the stress of the work that he used to do in combat zones. And during this war, there have been men who have also taken their lives because they couldn't cope with going back to normalcy. And so that affected them, of course, in a bad way. And I think what I can say is that we can overcome and move on from conflict and be resilient and how to say, harness the positive of the camaraderie, the knowing that it was actually my fellow teammate that had my back, knowing that because of the serious and professional conduct of this team and this cohesiveness is something that I can take into society. And I think the best way to overcome is actually having a team, a post-war team, what's the word, like a team, a continued team fellowship. A brotherhood. And that's something that I know is very unique to my personal group of guys that I serve with, is that we are friends and family outside of war. We're not just colleagues in wartime that have to do our job and then go back to life as usual. And I've been a part of in former units that I served in where it was more or less that. You didn't really have a relationship outside of your reserve duty. You came to reserve duty, hi, and the jokes with the guys and whatever, and the cliques that you made in that battalion or what have you. But then you go back to life as normal once the duty's over, and we're done. The unit that I'm in today, it's a brotherhood, it's a family, it's a strong knit community that we have created outside of war. And we did that before the war started, which was, to me, one of our, the secret sauce, I would say, to the efficiency of my team. And that is really the identity that we have. That's our identity. My identity isn't built off of Doron in reserve duty. My identity in the team is Doron and Michael and whoever, right? If Bob, Billy, whatever, right? Who are outside, we're friends, we're family. You need something, I have your back. A guy needed to do renovations in their home or move. We would all come together, whoever was available, go to the house, move their house, paint the house, clean the house so that you could hand it over to the next tenants in good order, and help them get into their new home and get settled. If one of the teammates was in financial straits, we all step in and we help that person, and so on and so on and so on. Like, there's many examples I can give that my team have created a family environment. It's not just a team environment. It's not just a professional job environment, but we are family. And that bond and that brotherhood that extends outside of war, to me, is one of the secret sauces, so to speak, of being able to also overcome the PTS, to overcome the negative of post-war. And I think that's important. If you don't have someone to talk to,
what you're describing there, is that quite common in sort of the reserve units, that you are so tight-knit that you are sort of, you keep contact inside and outside of your duties, or sort of your active duties? Is that what you're describing? Is that? No.
What I'm describing is actually the exception to the rule. What I'm describing is something that is one of the reasons we're very appreciative to the team that we've created, is because we've created a family environment. And that's really thanks to my commander. I mean, he's the one that helped kind of build towards this environment and create that environment, actually, right? Because he's the team leader. He's the head commander. And through his leadership, through his focus and creating guidelines for the team of what we can, as far as talking about, let's say, politics or talking about whatever, creating these kind of like boundaries and respect and honor for each other, and making sure that this is the paramount, that when the war's over, it's not like, well, it doesn't matter what I said to that guy or what I did to or whatever. No, it does matter, because you are going to have to face him again, because this is a family environment. So it's just like if you have in your own family, you're not going to speak so harshly towards one of your family members or act in a certain way or whatever. It creates a certain conduct that is very healthy. So unfortunately, no, it is not the case for most of the military. And what it is if anything, that anybody who's listening, who is in a service in war or whatever, hopefully this is a motivation for you and for your teammates, that you create that environment. Because if you want something that is going to be healthy for you when you're sent into a very stressful war environment, this is the only thing that, in my opinion, is going to help you in the post deployment reality. Because then you have to deal with real issues, real stresses, if you don't have anyone to confide with, you don't have anyone to discuss that with, because I can't discuss what I've been through with friends in the civilian world, that have never experienced what I had to go through. So there isn't, I'm saying, that you don't have that peer conversation you can have with them, because they're, they don't understand. You can try to make them understand, but it's different. Though, that when we talk about, remember that time, when we basically, shit our pants, so to speak, when this and this happened and we thought we were going to die. And you laugh about it, you cry about it. You can have real discussions about it. Right? And so, because we've seen each other in the worst situations and the best situations. And so I think that is very important. And because it's going to take a toll on you. It's going to take a toll on you. And to get back to what you said about hunter and gatherers, I think that's also an important topic that I've seen expressed and described in a book series by Jack Carr, the first of the series known as The Terminal List, which is now also on Amazon. They have a TV show that depicts the story of the character of what he created in this series. And he actually goes into this quite a bit. For anyone who kind of understands what he's discussing there, he really goes into this whole dynamic about fight, flight, hunter-gatherer. He kind of delves into that, into the storyline of a fictional story, but it's coming from real life experiences of a Navy SEAL who's had to be in those circumstances, and he kind of so I'm saying is who goes into this psychology, this reality, this and discussing how many of us have forgotten that we don't know what it's like to go and go track down an animal, for your sustenance, for your, what is that like? How does the dynamics and the differences of how you value this piece of meat that you're about to consume now, that you just got at a burger joint, versus, no, I had to stalk this animal. I had to quietly get up to, and this whole concept, right, of a reality that is something that we're just not used to in the most Western, societies. And then to give people another outlet to try to explore these concepts, you have Tim Kennedy with Sheepdog Response. That's also where you have a former Green Beret who is taking all the tools that he has learned in hunting, in fighting, in the ring, in the octagon, with UFC and all this stuff, on a high level standard of like talking about survival, not just on the battlefield, but survival in the highest, most elite forms of combat, in hand-to-hand combat with fellow athletes, and then basically taking all those life lessons of how to hunt, how to fight, how to this, and putting into civilians and helping in a program to help civilians learn these tools of survival that we've lost through, like you said, because people used to die in more violent ways, so to speak. In a way, it's good that that society is less violent and that there's been less need for us to kill each other in wars and all that. So I know that, just from listening to one of my friends who studied this about the history of wars and how today less people are dying, there's less conflicts between neighboring countries and whatever, and tribes. So yes, on the one hand, society's gotten better when it comes to war and lethal, violent deaths of people. At the same time, we've become very soft. And what happens is that we still have evil, violent people in society. And if you're not mentally, physically, and trained and prepared to deal with that, then they're going to exploit your weakness. They're going to exploit what you don't know. Because they know violence, they grew up in violence, that's what they know, and they're going to take what they want unless there's somebody who's equally as violent to oppose them, but they're a warrior, poet, warrior. Yeah? You're both a warrior, but you're also a poet. You're somebody who has values, who has ethics, who have, guidelines. Yeah? They, a real violent person doesn't have to show it off how violent they are all the time. Are
you able to appreciate more the times when you're not under threat? So when you're home with your family and it's sort of relatively safe. Are you able to, it's like I guess someone having had, a deadly disease and then overcoming it and sort of suddenly realizing, that life could have been so much worse. I mean, appreciating that you're that most of us are not able to appreciate when that's the only thing we've been experiencing. Have you had that sense that you sort of now you have had intense moments in Gaza and been under threat that you can appreciate more when you're not, when you're safe?
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's exactly how I feel. That ever since we got our last deployment done under our belt, the feeling of I'm back with my family, I get to hug my kids again, that hopefully I can take advantage of this extra day, this extra gift given to me by God, by just the circumstances that thankfully I'm not one of those casualties of war, and that these children don't end up now orphaned because their dad had to pay the ultimate sacrifice. So on the one hand, grateful. There is definitely a gratefulness and an appreciation for every day that is a gift given to me. And I imagine maybe I have appreciation for that a little bit more than maybe most people that maybe take for granted the fact that they wake up in the morning tomorrow, that they're not threatened by a sniper with a 50 cal that will blow them to bits. Like one of the young soldiers that I visited in the hospital, who is one of the miracle cases. And I told him, I said, do you understand you got hit with a 50 caliber sniper round to the torso, which should have ripped you in half. I mean, this is physics. This is anybody who's ever been hit by these kind of bullets. That's the purpose of it, is to create the most maximum horrific damage. And you get to live and talk about it, to tell the story. And so I told him, I said, you're a walking miracle. Like, I hope you know that. And he said, absolutely. He's like, I am fully aware of it. He says, and it's such a fun joy as a old, crusty old dude to sit down with this young warfighter that I had the privilege to actually to evacuate him the first time. We did the medical evacuation from mass casualty. We ended up doing many different mass casualty events. and he was actually one of the soldiers we evacuated the first time he got wounded. So that's how we came in contact, actually. Young kid in his, I think he wasn't even 20 years old when we first met him in the battlefield. A young soldier, and then we heard about him getting hit by that 50 cal sniper, and that he was being hospitalized at a hospital. And so me and another gentleman went. One of my teammates went to visit, talk to him, and so on. So there are people like him that that there's the appreciation, of course, that I've been handed a miracle. Should have been dead. Same with my unit. There are multiple times that we could have easily been taken out by the multiple attempts of the enemy to try to kill us, and units in our vicinity. So there's definitely an appreciation for every day that I've been given as another extra gift, and I'm very thankful that I'm not wondering, is this going to be my last day again, another operation? Because that's always, I think, almost for most war fighters is as you're in a very extended war fighting and have had to go in hundreds of times into the pit of hell, so to speak, and come back out on the other side in one piece. There is definitely a gratitude and a different perspective on life.
You called yourself an old crusty guy, but you're 43.
Yeah,
that's I think is the average age of a soldier in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian army. I mean, they've been saying that for over a year now, so I mean the average age might have risen from 43 as well. But what is the how is that in the IDF in the terms of the sort of those soldiers that are doing sort of the combat, those clearing the tunnels, those sort of going in there as infantry?
Yeah.
What sort of the age and how long are you sort of expected to be fighting in those kinds of position in the IDF? When are you sort of pensioned off?
Retired, yeah.
Retired, yeah.
So actually the age limit went down just before the war, and consequently I actually got released from mandatory reserve duty from where I'd last been serving. So I ended up as a free agent, so to speak. And then thankfully I ran into the unit that I'm in today, and through a fellow friend of mine a work colleague that I worked with. And so they're just like, oh no, we can pull you in actually. And because you're a free agent, so to speak, you're not registered at whatever unit, then it's going to be much easier for us to draft you like almost like a team draft in sports or whatever. Yeah. And so I was of course very thankful because like I told you, I ended up joining a family environment and a team that is kind of like some of the other people in our community call us the A-team. It's like one of the titles we've been given or what have you. But it just really is a very privileged community to be a part of. And the thing that's neat with our unit is that basically all of our guys are volunteer, meaning that we don't have to be in this unit. You can walk away at any time. So it's not a mandatory reserve duty. Unlike a lot of combat units, it's a mandatory reserve duty. And so a lot of us are above that age cutoff where you're supposed to go into retirement of reserves, like where you no longer...
Is that 40 or...?
I think it was brought down to like 40, and now it's brought back up to like 45 or something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, it's in your 40s. Essentially, is the mandatory service, and essentially everyone who is in a combat unit after that, they are volunteering. You basically sign a waiver saying I'm waiving my rights to not be in active duty. and to continue my reserves.
Mm.
And then so yeah, you had some guys that were like in their late 50s, 60s, even 70s in combat positions in the IDF during this war, which is a very wide range.
In the 70s?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I believe that's the oldest that I can recall, that I remember, that was publicized. And I've met a few of these guys that really were anywhere between 50 and 60.
You can still, I guess, you can still be fit in your 50s.
Oh yeah.
Again, this is because, I mean, what you're describing is to be in, I mean, to be in a combat role, to, go into Gaza, to have heavy gear. It's hot. It's physically and psychologically demanding. But I mean, the physical aspect of it, I mean, you would need to be in shape, right?
Yes.
In order to do this properly. And that's, you can still be quite fit in your 50s, although you're not in your 20s anymore, right?
Correct. Correct.
But how do you deal with because the IDF is known for having a significant number of female soldiers. There's still a conscription for women as well in Israel, isn't it? I mean, they have to go 1 year and men 3 years. Is that being drafted? Is that?
Yeah. So it's essentially your the initial service, right? Is right after high school. Is it used to be 3 years for men, 2 years for girls.
Okay.
And then you actually had that reduced again before the war. They reduced those numbers by, I think, nearly close to half a year less
for both men and
yeah. So they reduced the mandatory service, and now they've brought it back to, because part of the plan was we're going to make a smaller military, less. Everybody wants to like downsize, if you will, and less time, less. And then essentially, so essentially the young soldiers who started with a short mandatory service period found themselves in the middle of a war being told that they're going to actually extend their mandatory service period to the 3 years that it used to be to go back to. And that's not what they walked into, right? The reality that they so-called signed up for, which they didn't, but you know what I mean? Yeah. In their minds, it's like, well, I came in believing that I had a contract of like this, of 2 years, and now you're telling me I have to do 2.5? Like what? So there was quite a bit of, it created quite a stir amongst the younger soldiers of, what is this, what is this nonsense? But for the guys that are of my age group, who had longer service time, harder training, and so on, we actually valued what we had to endure, so to speak, to get the shorter end of the stick, because we also see it in just our mentality, in our way of conducting ourselves. You're more resilient, right? You're more able to withstand more stressful situations, if you will, more disappointments, the uncertainties of war, and so on, because that's what war is too. There's a ton of uncertainty, and so that wears on you psychologically as a warfighter. And so, I mean, if you ask people like me of the old school way of thinking, we believe more that actually the way we used to do things created more of a resilience, while at the same time we do believe and understand in the need to tweak some of the physical grueling process that is done to create you as a warfighter, that create injuries and long-term injuries like back, knees, you name it, whatever. So sure, like if there's a way to where we can tweak those systems, again, I don't want to get into details, but things that we can tweak on the physical aspect that also create long-term injuries, then if we can tweak that, sure. But still, there's a lot of the physical, grueling things that you need to go through that also creates a warfighter that on the other side of that is a resilient and capable war machine, so to speak, which is exactly why the Navy SEALs, the Green Berets, all of our elite units in the IDF, why they are the way they are, is because they don't necessarily tweak away those aspects of the training that at the end of that pipeline create an efficient warfighter. So there are ways you can tweak, but you got to be careful with that. In our opinion, you got to be careful with that because you don't want to lose that. You don't want to lose that quality that you get at the other end of that difficult pipeline.
Do you have female infantry soldiers fighting in Gaza alongside men?
Yes, we do have that as well. Not just in combat positions, but other positions that they serve in. But yeah, we do. We've had our female combat unit deployed to Gaza as well.
Are those all female units, or are they mixed within ordinary units? Do you have mixed female-male infantry units in Gaza?
It is a mixed unit. This particular combat unit.
So it's a particular unit.
Yes.
So
yes. They don't join in with the other units that are all male.
Because do I understand you correctly? Most units are all men, all
yes,
male.
In combat for sure. Yeah. In combat or tier 1 units, they are all 100% male. Again, of course, there is how to say a revision of those standards where they're trying to integrate females into those units as well. Again,
why is that being done?
Well, because it's the new popular thing in militaries. They're doing it in the U.S. They're doing it, I believe, in European militaries as well. But I'm more familiar with the U.S. Military standards and things that are changing, and veterans are kind of griping about it. But essentially, it's not that we don't want females in the very tip of the spear combat units. It's just a matter of can you hold your own like the rest of the guys, because really the smallest, least strongest or whatever guy, at least there's a certain bar that he was able to pass, right? A standard. And so as long as we don't bring that standard, lower the standard for the sake of bringing in females, we're fine with that, right? Again, my personal opinion on this, there are guys that will serve with me who think otherwise, think altogether differently on this particular matter. Because again, this is an issue of debate. There are people discussing this, but my personal view is real simple: is anybody, whatever the color of your skin, your gender, the color of your eyes or whatever, or how short or how tall or whatever, if you pass the cut, right? If you pass the standard of what we all have to pass to be in this unit, knock yourself out. Go for it. Why not?
Are you able to have a honest debate about this in Israel and in the IDF about integrating female soldiers? And I'm asking because we are not able to have that discussion in Norway. It's sort of been decided politically that we are going to have, I think now that what they take in is around 35% females in the basic training, and their ambition is 50%, and they integrate females in units all over in Norway. But we haven't been fighting wars. I know that Norwegian officers are not daring to speak out about it because it hurts their career. So they are going. I think they are cowards because they are not going along with it. They should have, because they are lowering the standards in Norway. I mean, they do have different physical requirements for women and men.
Yeah.
And it's not spoken out about, although I think every one of us that have been serving, I did my basic training in infantry, and then I went to infantry or officer school, and we had a few, couple of women there as well, and they were the least capable physically. I mean, at that time it was physical, and you describe it. War is still, for infantry, a physically demanding exercise. And yes, you find some men or some women that are better than some men, but overall,
exactly.
I mean, you can see it in sport. Men are stronger, higher, more enduring than women, and there is also a mental aspect to it, I believe. But many then, when we say we raise the concerns about where our units are going, because as you say also, I mean, it's a marginal, often, who gets out on top in common is such a marginal thing. It's just this tiny little advantage that will make you win. And when you sort of handicap yourself going into the fight, it makes no sense. To have a military unit or have a military force is all about trying to gain advantages over the enemy. But many then points to IDF. I said, well, look at IDF. They have female soldiers. It's all going well there. But, that's why I'm asking, because, you're not doing it the same way that we are doing it, by integrating it completely. So that's just what I sort of wanted to sort of just get the facts right, because people have the opinion that that units are integrated, mixed units, and they're not.
No, they're not. But again, that particular unit in the IDF is, in my opinion, a failed. It's a failed cause. And I've seen throughout the years just many different instances where I think they've proven the concept to not be to be a failed concept, right? On the other hand, they've also had some very good successes. So then it supports the people who oppose my opinion on that and say, no, but you see, they also prove themselves here, with a terrorist encounter. A terrorist encounter or whatever.
This unit is sort of, what's the size of it? Is it a battalion?
Like a battalion. And again, it's mixed. And again, when you have men and women together, forget the physical. You have the sexual attractions. You can't avoid that. You can't ignore that. And creating those sexual tensions within a combat unit is destructive. It's inefficient. Not just that, put away that. The fact that me as a normal male, when I see a female under attack, my instant defense system to want to defend the female, which is just natural biology, the way my makeup is as a man, is to immediately run to her rescue, way different than if it's one of my men who is under attack. So then there's all of that. And these are things that I think a lot of the modern military wants to ignore, including mine. They want to ignore that, and they push down the facts. Because to me, at the end of the day, it's not about my opinion. The question is, what does the data say? What do the facts say? Like I said, with the training, for example, for just the regular guys, that is grueling. I'm all about making it as most difficult as possible, but if we can avoid certain injuries that are going to be long-term injuries for that warfighter, and basically make them less of an efficient warfighter because they have to carry these injuries into war and into doing their job. That's also not good. So there's always this fine line of how do I create you in such a way to where you're going to be a well-rounded war fighter, but able to do your job still. Yeah. And I think that when you start to integrate females into this very, very dangerous job, it's unfortunately shows from time and time again that it doesn't bear very good fruit. And it's not just in military, it's also in law enforcement.
Yeah.
I have seen time and time again where females think because they've been through the same academy as the guys and whatnot, they've been given this false sense of confidence in front of an assailant that is stronger, that is faster, and that ends up taking their life and or maiming them very, very horribly. And very, and to me, that's unacceptable. You can't enforce the law. And it's not just the females, by the way, who get affected by this. It's also the men, because when you lower the standards, that also means that you end up with weaker men in those positions who are less capable. And then I've also seen failure in that. Where you have men who don't belong in this industry. They get their butt handed to them by these criminals. What you want to have to enforce the law or to fight wars is you want violent men.
Yes.
And if you have a violent woman who can, again, stand shoulder to shoulder with me in that standard that's same for us, no problem. Okay. Again, like I said, there's still the psychological and sexual tensions that I prefer not to be there. But if you don't lower the standard for both of us, and if we both are able to achieve and make that standard, then I think that's a different conversation. But
I couldn't agree more with you, and it's to me it's self-evident. I mean, of course, I've been in those kind of units, but I think it's mere logic. Just growing up, as a kid, you would understand that it's a difference between men and women, and as you say, that's a point I brought up in the Norwegian debate. That the sexual aspect is a distraction to have women there. Men act differently when they're an all-men group and when there are women there. It's a distraction. But it's amazing to see how impossible it is to get people to say what we are saying now. In Norway, I hope it's worse in Norway than it is in Israel. And I think, the reason why it's so bad here is that we haven't really been testing our military for a long time. And people don't really expect it to happen either. But then it's too late.
Yeah.
Because now we are wasting our resources building an army that just by the mere fact that we are making it 50-50 men, female, are at an enormous disadvantage if we were to get into a combat. And I agree with you when it comes to law enforcement as well. We are now in sort of the police school. We have had for several years over 50% females coming in because they have better grades than men. Get into these schools, but then, the reality, out in the streets is that 95% or even more of the criminals are men, violent, strong men, where we then need more female police officers to deal with it. And even, 3 women cannot handle a violent man. So, it's... And
even 3 men on a very violent assailant who are not properly trained. And this is the biggest problem in law enforcement that I've seen constantly. And I've myself have been involved in volunteering and helping in Israel with this, so I'm also talking from real world experience, where the reason why I help these people do their job in volunteering is because I know that they don't have people that are trained at the level that I'm trained at doing law enforcement.
Yeah.
And then you see that, and so what I'm essentially doing many times is just assisting these people. And I'll give you an example. We had a very violent guy who was resisting arrest, and I think they had like 3 guys on him, and they're fighting and wrestling and da-da-da, the whole thing. And what I chose to do, instead of like most people like to do, is jump into the action, is to stand, pause, observe, process the situation. And when I saw the leverage point that I could use to help assist these guys to, finalize getting them in cuffs, that's when I decided to step in, and everything went smoothly from that point on. But up until then, it was wrestling, fighting, pulling, this, that. And it's because law enforcement in general doesn't have proper techniques of how to deal with violent criminals. It's just assumption of if I throw enough officers at the problem, it'll fix itself. But it's not that. It's you have to throw training to the individual, and really a properly trained officer, it's enough to have 2 people on one of the most violent, just bad dudes that you have to encounter when you do encounter that, because it's a very physical job and very violent job in some cases. And so for the worst case scenario, if you had the right technique and training, then you could have 2, 3. And sure, the more people you kind of bring in, at some point you end up with too much.
Yeah.
But when you have that right balance of, okay, we have enough people to do this, and you do this, and you work in teamwork, it's done. But when you have, again, poorly trained, incapable people to do the job, you just end up with, unfortunately, risking the lives of the officers, but also the assailant.
Yeah.
And many times that ends in very, very bad situations where they have to draw their weapon. If it's in the U.S., the person ends up dead, or someone else, bystander, gets wounded because they had to draw their weapon. It went to lethal force. It's like, no, it doesn't have to go to that. Not at all. If you know what you're doing, the person could have been arrested, thrown into the vehicle, processed, job done, and now it ended up into a catastrophe. Again, because of poor training and poor policy pushing a lot of woke agenda that leads to people's lives. And when it comes to the real world scenarios, you can play that game all you want in a office space, knock yourself out. You're just making people uncomfortable that they can't share their views or opinions or whatever. Fine. Not in law enforcement, not in military, not where it's life matters scenarios, not in firefighting. Okay?
Yes, true. You mentioned that there was frustration among soldiers in the IDF after the conflict with Hezbollah in 2006. I guess you referred to that. You sort of went in, took out some units, some weapons, but then withdrew, and they were able to rebuild. Now, and for some time, there has been talk about another escalation in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, between IDF and Hezbollah. We had this, the pagers exploding, the walkie-talkies exploding. There has been yesterday, there was another barrage or overflights by Israeli warplanes and some bombings, and rhetoric heating up. The U.S. is warning Israel and others in the region to sort of stay calm. 2 things. Do you think that there's going to be an escalation and even an invasion from IDF into certain areas of Lebanon? And secondly, how do you think that should play out? If I understand you, or I read you that you think it's necessary to try to disable some of Hezbollah's capabilities.
Yeah.
What do you think will happen? What do you think should happen?
So based on the latest information, it seems that a ground operation is being prepared, and some of the top generals in the military are advising the Israeli government, because at the end of the day, they have to do whatever the government decides. They don't do what they want. And that is the job of the military, is to do the will of the people via the elected officials that we have, right? So they give their advice, and based on the advice of the top generals, they're saying that a ground operation is a must. I agree with them that a ground operation is a must. And not just that, for the sake of the Lebanese who have been held captive, hostage, by this proxy of Iran, Hezbollah, they need to be set free from that. Not just for the sake and the safety and security of this of Israel from the threat from this terrorist entity is taken over, but also for daily life for Lebanese. Lebanon used to be the pearl of the Middle East. It used to be the France of the Middle East. Okay, that you would want to go as a tourist and enjoy the beautiful restaurants and hotels and everything, and the beautiful countryside and the nature. It was a wonderful country until Hezbollah took over, this terrorist group. And so you had Christian minorities, not really minorities, but what I'm saying is the population was basically a third Christian, a third Muslim, different Muslim background, and maybe technically less than a third, but Druze, and then a few other minorities. So you have a nation that is kind of multi-religious backgrounds, little multi-ethnical background, and they were able to get along. They were peaceful people. They were for the Arab world, these people were very, very moderate, had culture, could speak French and so on. They were like your cultured, Europeanized, so to speak, Arabs. And then Hezbollah came in and took all that away. Took all of that away. Fear, intimidation, etc. Like what Hamas has been doing in Gaza, but not on the same scale. So I know that the Lebanese, and I know people personally from Lebanon that are exiled from Lebanon, that have left, and have shared their concerns for their countrymen. They're concerned that Israel will in retaliation to these terrorists, that we will hurt friends and family and so on. And I share their concerns, and I do care about their family members, and I do care about the innocents in Lebanon. It's unacceptable that they have to continue to live under this reign of terror. So my hopes is that we're able to really destroy the Hezbollah terrorist network that has been holding that country captive, and that we end the reign of terror for our Israeli civilians who have been living in displacement from their homes. Over 100,000 gone. I think it's about 20,000 are abroad in other countries and living in a hotel status, or the majority, about was it 80 to 90%, are living in hotels in Israel and different spread out throughout Israel. That's not a way to live for nearly a year. I mean, I know some people, they go to hotels for vacation, and it's cool and fun after day 1, 2. Yeah. But usually, if anybody's ever been on an extended vacation, you're like, okay, it's been a week. It's time to go home.
It's true.
Imagine doing that for like a year. And that's, again, the good case scenario, right? We're not like the Gazans who are living in really dire conditions. Again, it's not as extreme as the international community and the news is reporting. They are getting food and shelter, and they're getting their needs met. But it's not a reality, Their home is probably destroyed, neighborhood, everything that was their normal is not normal anymore. So I would hate to see that become replicated in Lebanon. That the civilians of Lebanon, the population that have lived there, that have built families and businesses and everything, that all of what they have built and all that they love and care for, that it gets destroyed because these terrorists they're drawing us into conflict with them, because we can't ignore the tens of thousands of rockets that have been fired into Israel through them.
What would a ground operation in Lebanon now look like, in your opinion? What do you think? I mean, how would this invasion play itself out?
Yeah.
And how massive must the operation be in order for not the same or approximately the same result as in 2006 happening? What will it take to destroy Hezbollah?
Essentially, it will take us making another call for reservists en masse. So we're talking about tens of thousands of soldiers being called up for combat and doing a massive ground operation, on a larger scale than what we've done in Gaza, to give people a picture. And again, to not give exact numbers and techniques, because there are a lot of things that we're not allowed to share from what we've been briefed. But what I do know is that we are prepared, that we are trained for this scenario. And what it does mean, though, as far as to give a very simple picture, it's a very large-scale military operation. And like you pointed out, actually, for Afghanistan, right, the numbers to be able to eradicate these terrorist groups, it's much larger than what a lot of generals would like to propose for financial reasons or manpower reasons. But yeah, we're basically going to have to throw everything that we have at this on a military scale to really put an end to this threat. And hopefully, if we're not put under more international pressure and more just insanity from the West, who don't seem to understand we are in all-out fight for our survival, we can hopefully get this done, if we have to, very quickly and very efficiently. And I think it is unfortunately inevitable that we do have to go into Lebanon. It doesn't seem that there's another way.
Is there a political will sufficient in Israel to do that kind of operation, massive operation, ground operation in Lebanon?
Yeah. It seems like it, but at the same time, there is definitely a lot of, I think, something that people aren't aware of, because you probably, if you had any reporting about protests in Israel and anti-protest of the Prime Minister, it's not that these protests are because people are united on the battlefield when we have to fight. If you're a lefty, righty, religious, secular, etc., which is the makeup of Israeli society. It's like we unite here, but then we divide and start protesting and fighting each other, and whatever back home. What really is happening is that there is targeted messaging that Israelis are getting, depending on their political worldview, and they're basically being targeted through social media. And essentially, what I'm saying is there are entities that are putting a lot of money and a lot of resources to tear us up from inside, and they're using social media to to get us to be against each other. And the same thing is happening in the United States. And the same thing, I believe, is happening also in Europe, in different places. But this is my observation. This is what I'm seeing. Because I can't understand how is it that if these are true grassroots protests, that you have these massive, really, or massive, highly funded banners, posters, billboards, and major, billboards in the main parts of the city, kind of like, for example, in Times Square in New York. If you have a billboard to advertise your company and or a political slogan that you want to push, you're paying a top dollar for those advertisements. It's not some grassroots, me and my friends are gathering together and collecting some change to be able to make that poster or billboard.
True.
And that's what you're seeing. That's what I'm seeing. And so I hold in question how real these protests are, so to speak, how authentic they are, and how much outside influence is coming because of those that want to topple our government, and essentially they want to topple our country, right? So I see this as a existential threat to our democracy, and I think these entities, these individuals, need to be held accountable, and they need to be tried for interfering with the affairs of our country from the outside. But unfortunately, because they're very clever at how they do these things, you don't really ever really know who exactly is funding, who exactly is involved. And then the people who are on the streets, they truly believe that they're there because of this cause without realizing that they have been coaxed to be there. And it's not a real cause. And all of that is also partially because people really are fed up and frustrated, and have real frustrations and real issues with our leadership, starting from the government to military and onwards, of just a lot of failures. And we're just like, listen, we're sick and tired of this. The people have the will to do whatever it takes to get back to normalcy, and are willing to pay the price of, again, leaving their homes and doing whatever it takes, go back to combat, whatever. But let's have a plan, have unity, and get it done, and go back to normal. So there is that is there, I think, for the majority of Israelis. But it makes it very difficult to get that authentic cause when you have these outside influences that are pushing that real frustration into stupid causes that are really just creating more distraction, more division within ourselves, when it really isn't there. There isn't as harsh of those divisions as being reported by the media, which I think are part of the perpetrators of this false narrative and propaganda. It's not just, like I said, through social media, but it's also the media that's playing a very big role in this, and causing a lot of this pushing buttons, of people, because they know what how people are feeling, but they're not telling the truth, and that right there to me is also criminal. To me, there has to be a certain level of authenticity in news reporting. You're supposed to tell the news, not push agenda, not push worldviews that you hold. If you're a real professional in whatever you do, especially when it comes to me in those fields, politics, personal opinion has to be outside and excluded from the conversation. You're here to report the news, not to push your news to the masses. And unfortunately, news outlets are doing exactly the opposite of what they should be doing.
But luckily, we now have new technology and podcasts where
exactly
you can have sort of unfiltered reporting and views, and I think that's sort of a hopeful development. Doron Keidar, it's been a pleasure, although the topic is very difficult and troubling, and where the prospects are still sort of uncertain. It's been really appreciate you sharing your insights into what's going on in Israel, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, and overall when it comes to the hard task of military units fighting. So thank you so much for being here, and I wish you the best of luck, even if it might entail some harsh fighting in Lebanon. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it.